During the chaos of the aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, a man was gunned down in the streets of Brooklyn. What really happened, and who isn't speaking up? Episode 62 of Crime Over Wine starts right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Crime Over Wine, the only podcast with head-scratching true crime stories that are just better over a bottle of wine. I'm your host, Liam Collins, and this week we are bringing it all the way back to episode 8. My guest co-host this week is Alex Stata. Hello, Alex. Welcome back into the Crime Vineyard.
Hi, Liam. I'm so excited to be back. Thank you for having me back.
Of course. So, Alex, when we go like way back, like you and I, of course, we're besties. But you go way back into the like original days of the Crime Vineyard, all the way back to episode 8, like we said, when we talked about the Sneha Phillip case. I still to this day, like every once in a while, that case crosses my mind again, and I'm just like, what the hell actually happened? We've had like a year to like ruminate on that case. What are your current thoughts on Sneha Phillip?
It's so funny. I remember I texted you, I think a few months ago. I was in a cab in New York City and she came up on the advertisements on like the back of the cab, like when they were playing all those things. I'm pretty sure I texted you, but I was cracking up. I mean, I still feel the same way. I think either one of two things. I still think she either ran away or I think she, what was it? That she like committed suicide, I think, and is somewhere in the river, because I just don't believe. And I stand firm by that belief.
I don't know. I've just like never been one, like this is the only case where I feel like I can be proven wrong, in my opinion, that like people can just like up and move, like can just like up and like uplift their lives and just like go start over somewhere. Because it just feels like if you're ever going to be able to do that, 9/11 is the time.
Oh, 100%. I'm with you where someone can prove me wrong. I mean, at this rate, no one's proving anyone wrong in any sort of way, but it's such an interesting, I remember that case. It was so interesting. And I guess we'll really never know what happened.
I guess not. And like what kind of like gets me is that like the family seems to be so adamant that she was a victim of 9/11. So like I guess I have to respect that much, I suppose. But like I also like the fact, like again, like what you're just talking about, how her face popped up in the back of the cab, like people are still very much so, like it's still very much so considered an open case, because like the people who like the investigators are not convinced that she was a victim. And so like I just feel like there's too many balls up in the air. Like I need like one more to drop, and like again, like the fact that like of all the people who have yet to be identified from the attacks, like people who were confirmed to have been there, like you're telling me that it's like she's one of the people, and like when like there was no reason for her to be there, like there was no evidence that she was there, or like, you know, anything pointing to the fact that she would have been there. Like there's just no evidence that she ever was, like she just happens to be one of those people. It just seems odd to me.
I completely agree. It's beyond odd. And I'm pretty sure even with the people who were confirmed in the buildings, like until they find some sort of identifying mark or item, they're technically not considered, like they're not case closed, I'm pretty sure. Like even to this day, you know, people, I'm pretty sure it was like within the past year or two that they found some item of one of the victims, and then that's considered like, you know, that's like the closure to the family. So I agree with you that you almost do have to be a little empathetic to her family and that they believe that she was a victim. But, and this may be harsh, but it's maybe they're not ready to face the realities of everything else that could have happened to her. And knowing that everything else, you know, went on, it's a lot easier to sit there maybe and say, you know what, like, this is our closure by saying like she was a victim. Right.
Yeah. And exactly. Like it seems like that the logical explanation is that she, like the family, just this is just easier for them to deal with. Like it just is easier for them to wrap their minds around the fact that she died in the attacks, as opposed to, you know, facing a different reality of like what may have actually happened or may have happened, like other possibilities. But I mean, man, go listen to episode 8, because there's so many details that we can't even get into, because we'll take up a whole nother episode talking about this. But there are a lot of things that even happened before Sneha went missing, that just are contributing to a whole lot of question marks in my brain. So go listen to that episode. If you haven't yet, you get to listen to Alex and I talk about wine and talk about that case and talk about insane details of this investigation. So if you haven't done that yet, go listen to that. And in the meantime, Alex, we have something to celebrate over a glass of wine as well. Alex just finished the bar exam in New York, which is super, super exciting. She has not found out her score just yet. But we should pop open a bottle of wine and celebrate that, because that's a huge accomplishment for you.
Thank Thank you. Thank you so much. And I agree. Let's celebrate.
Yeah, let's do that. So this week we are drinking Substance Cabernet Sauvignon. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon elixir, is how it's described. Blackberry currant, pencil lead, cedar, and layered and deep, resting in the glass, inviting you to sip and sip. It's rich and complex and just plain delicious. And what a way to describe this wine. I feel like I
What?
am much more intrigued to drink it after reading that.
Honestly,
Especially
me too.
pencil lead.
Yeah, I was looking at how this wine was described and I was like, oh, everything sounds good. And then all of a sudden you get to pencil lead. And I just want to know,
Yeah.
I guess, who in the description tasted pencil lead to then be like, oh,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
this is what it tastes like.
Yeah. Let's make sure we talk about that. Well, I've heard of like I've had wines before, and I can't remember the wine, but off the top of my head, but I've had wines where it was like pencil shavings, and like I guess that's like a fairly common, like I guess because also if you're talking about resting wine in oak barrels, I guess maybe that's part of it there, but like it's just kind of like an odd way to describe that. Like I'm like, okay, just tell me that it tastes like wood or whatever, but or like metallic-y.
Right,
Pencil
something
is
like a
weird.
smoky, right. Right, I agree. Something different.
Right. So many ways to describe that. So many ways to describe that. Wait, I kind of do get oddly enough a little bit of pencil lead in there. Like I've never tasted pencil lead, but I feel like that's how it would taste to me.
Right, you think about the fact that pencil lead is in the description, and then I guess,
Yeah.
like the tannins in it leave that like almost like a
Yeah.
metallic, I guess, taste right before. I mean,
Yeah.
blackberry's good. It's very like rich. It's not too like sharp, I guess. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people, I know so many of my friends like hate red wine solely because of like all the tannins. It leaves that like
Yeah.
harsh flavor, but I like this.
Yeah.
I think it's really great.
Well, that's specifically why I go for Cabernets, Alex, because I love the tannins. I love the lingering after effects. It's like it sticks with you like long after you take the sip. And so that's exactly the kind of the wine I want. It's an experience. Drinking wine is an experience.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm a big red wine girl, but it's always
Yeah.
funny when my friends are like, oh, I'm afraid to try it because I don't like all those like flavors and the tannin and whatnot. And I don't know. I think
Yeah.
I love a Cabernet. So this was right up my alley when you suggested this one for this week. I was like, perfect.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, speaking of a case that's perfect for you, Alex, we are going to bring it all the way back to another 9/11 related case, but this one is arguably like more insane, but like in other ways just like totally like straightforward. I think we have a lot to talk about this week, Alex. Are you ready for this?
I'm so ready. I have lots of opinions, so bring it on. I'm ready.
I love it. Bring all your opinions to me. So last time you were on, Alex, like we said, we talked about Sneha Phillip, a woman believed to have gone missing on 9/11, and at one point or another wasn't believed to be an actual victim of the terrorist attacks in Midtown Manhattan. But this week, Alex, I want to tell you about the only person who died in New York City on that day, but who survived the attack at the World Trade Center. This week, I want to tell you the story of Henryk Siwiak, the last man murdered on 9/11. Henryk Siwiak was a Polish immigrant from Krakow, Poland, a city in the southern part of the country. But unlike most immigrants, Henryk wasn't necessarily interested in moving to America because of the promise of fortune and opportunity. Henryk was more or less coming to America out of pure desperation. In 2000, Henryk lived in Poland with his wife Eva and their 2 kids, and they were a happy family by all accounts. Henryk worked as an inspector with the Polish National Railroad, but in the fall of 2000, he ended up losing his job, and because of the poor shape of the Polish economy at the time, Henryk was having a really hard time finding a new job to supply for his family. So Henryk decided he was going to make a big move and go to America, the land of pure opportunity, and he was going to work, and send his earnings back home to pay for his kids to go to school. He moved to Rockaway, Brooklyn, a Polish community not too far from where his sister actually lived in Queens. She moved to America about 7 years prior to Henryk for similar reasons. When her health food store went out of business in Poland, she came to the greatest melting pot in the world, New York City, to look for work. And so America didn't really seem to be all that lonely to Henrik for that reason. He wasn't with his family, sure, and didn't really speak much English beyond what he ended up learning from watching television, but at least he had his sister nearby for some companionship. And so Henrik's life consisted of him taking as many jobs as he could. Every month he would send half of his about $1,000 in earnings back to Poland for his family, and he very much so intended to return home once he had earned enough money to get his family back on their feet.
I think it's so interesting hearing about him and why he came here because he's almost just the same as everyone else. Like you said, the United States of America, specifically New York City, it's a huge melting pot, and it's where people want the opportunity to work and are going to be making money to send back to their families. And, he clearly has no connections here other than his sister. So it's like knowing that ultimately something horrible happens to him. It's like, why would someone do this? What motive do they have? Because as we know right now, like, he's not connected to anyone here in America.
Yeah. Well, and that was almost like a little bit more like vulnerable, right? Like, obviously, I mean, because it's you're in a different country, you don't really speak the language all that well, you don't really know anybody, and so I think that really sets up a potentially kind of dangerous situation, right? Because I mean, you hear it all the time about like I just feel like that's just like a perfect formula for a misunderstanding, for just to be in the wrong place at the wrong time potentially. And so yeah, it feels like very much so like someone potentially taking advantage of Henrik just because like he's not from around here, period, right?
Right. No, exactly. And I mean, that's kind of like the unfortunate world we live in back then, but also even now, people have no reason, rhyme or reason really to be doing these things. So it's just like on the one hand, people look for motive and reasons why people do things in these crimes. But then, sometimes you have to think about the alternative. Like it could have just easily been a misunderstanding. And,
Right.
That's the unfortunate way the cookie crumbles.
Right. Well, we're going to find out how this cookie crumbles as well, Alex. But, almost a year after Henrik took the leap and moved to America came the morning of September 11th, 2001. Like we've heard so many times before, it was a beautiful Tuesday morning. The blue in the sky was piercing and the world was turning on as it always had every other day. New York City was bustling with people trying to keep the island afloat, frankly, and that included Henrik. He made his way down to Midtown Manhattan to report for his job for the day and collect his bucks at the site, which was just a stone's throw away from the World Trade Center when the first plane hit. And the world changed. Suddenly, the hustle and bustle was happening in reverse. People who were flocking toward Midtown were running in the opposite direction very suddenly. Henrik, still not fully able to understand English and ask for help, was just as, if not more, confused than the rest of New York City. So he ended up just walking back across the bridge to his apartment in Brooklyn. By that point, the second plane had hit, and the world was just in a frenzy, and that video was on every TV in the world. But Henrik's TV wasn't working, and even if it was, he probably still wouldn't have been able to fully grasp what was happening that day, just like the rest of us were. So he called his wife, told her he was okay, and she filled him in as best as she could. But even then, they didn't have the fullest understanding of the gravity of what they were living through, or how the world had truly changed forever.
That's just like, it's so crazy to think about. Like, I've been to other countries where people don't speak English at all. Like, so it's just, I can't imagine being put in a situation where you literally, in a situation to that magnitude even, that you literally have no idea what's going on around you. Like, imagine just walking in the street and you just see thousands and thousands of people running in the opposite direction. Like, and you don't think, you can't really ask. And that's a scary situation to be in general. I mean, thankfully he made it back to his home in Brooklyn that day, but I feel like there's a part of me that can picture a world where he's just kind of like walking around like confused, like looking for answers and not understanding what was going on.
Yeah. Well, and think about like how confused everybody else was who like could speak English and like could ask for, for help or for directions or for, an explanation or something, or like, turn on the news to see what was really going on. And Henrik didn't have that luxury. And so so it just adds that extra layer of confusion, I feel like, where like, obviously I'm sure he figured that like something bad had happened, but certainly not to the magnitude that we all know it to have been, 23 years later. So yeah, it just adding to all the confusion, adding to all the unfortunate situations.
No, of course. And I mean, of course, everyone was confused that day and had questions, but I mean, of course, we also don't know what his wife said to him on the phone, but at least, I mean, I know how my family reacted when we were learning what was going on. It was kind of, everyone was telling you to like stay put, go home, like don't move, like be with your family.
Right.
And, you know, again, we don't know what his wife said to him on the phone, but he also didn't have that luxury of being like, okay, well, you know, this is what you need to do. Go with people, you know, report to people,
Right.
tell them you're safe and, you know, stay put. So,
Yeah, he didn't have anyone. Yeah.
right.
Right. Yeah. Well, Eva, also asked Henryk to stay home that day, Alex, but Henryk's job had closed, of course, and Henryk wasn't able to even go a single day without work at this point. So he ended up walking down to a Polish employment agency later that day to ask for work, and he was given a job cleaning a supermarket in Brooklyn for $10 an hour that night, working the graveyard shift. He was told to meet a man named Adam at the grocery store, and Henryk told the agency what he would be wearing to relay that to the grocery store so that Adam would know who to look for. He was going to be wearing a camouflage army surplus jacket with matching pants, his favorite outfit according to his family. And around 11 that night, he asked his landlord for directions to get to the supermarket, which was just a few subway stations down, short ride, long walk kind of thing. But Henryk wrote down the directions and got on the A train and was looking out for the stop at the 1500 block of Albany Avenue. And so Adam was also waiting for the man in the camouflaged uniform to arrive so he could show Henryk where the cleaning supplies were, show him around, and get him to work. And so Adam stood there, right on time, to let Henryk into the store, but that time came and went. And then when over an hour passed from when Henryk was supposed to meet Adam at the store and report for work, Adam went back inside because Henryk never showed up. Crime Over Wine is sponsored by BetterHelp. As someone who's used therapy for years, I know that finding a therapist can sometimes be a stress on its own, juggling your full-time job, your family, your friends, your podcast, and trying to find the right therapist on top of that can almost feel impossible. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist that works for you on your terms. It's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to one of 33,000 licensed professional therapists in as little as a few days. And because finding a new therapist is a lot like finding a new bottle of wine, if you don't jive with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new one at no additional cost. You can get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by going to betterhelp.com/crimeoverwine. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crimeoverwine for 10% off your first month. Join over 4 million people who decided to get help and get happy with BetterHelp.
It's Michelle Herron, the co-host of Crime Over Wine Weekly, a brand new show keeping you up to date on the latest in the true crime world. We know how much you rely on Crime Over Wine on Wednesdays to learn about a new case. But on Crime Over Wine Weekly, you'll hear our takes on the cases making the headlines. Join us every Sunday for a new episode of your new crime and wine obsession.
Henryk was on the A train, waiting for that stop with his bag in one hand and clutching the paper with his directions on it in the other. And when he got off the train and walked onto the street, he looked up to the numbered homes that didn't really seem to match the 1,500 numbers of Albany Avenue that he was expecting to be seeing, and he was likely putting together that he had gotten off at the wrong stop. And indeed he was. He was in Bed-Stuy, a neighborhood in Brooklyn about 4 miles further from the neighborhood he was supposed to be in that night.
You know, I just can't imagine feeling what he felt in that moment because, again, it's late. You don't know where you are. And, you know, to be quite candid, there are very dangerous places to be in New York City, places that anyone shouldn't really be like hanging out in alone. But it kind of raises those questions of what are the specifics of the directions he got from that landlord. I know, you know, he wrote them down, but why wouldn't that landlord, and half of me is kind of like, okay, well, it's not their responsibility. You know, they gave him directions to go to this location as he requested. But there's another part of me that's like, you know, there's a huge, huge language barrier there. Like, what more could have been done to make sure he didn't go off in the right direction, you know?
Yeah, I I also think that like this is New York City, and like listen, like I always think that New York City gets a bad rap for like being like for people who are like a little too rude, but like also like stereotypes are a stereotype for a reason. So it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if it was just like, yep, like here are your directions, like go about your way. But I also like it's adding to that layer, those layers of confusion, right? And it always like makes me like puts into perspective, like again, like people like this is like a dirty word to some people, but like the privilege of some of people, that like you like I like we're very privileged that like we go around America and like all these like English speaking countries and like can figure out how to get around and like can read most of the signs, like not have to worry about getting lost. But like these like here's Henryk like just trying to like get by and like with supply for his family, and like this is the best way he's gonna do it, and like literally has to struggle to like take the subway,
Right.
which like the New York City subway system is like complicated enough, y'all, like let alone if you don't speak English.
Oh, no, 100%. I mean, listen, like, you're talking 2001. Right now, if you told me to get on a subway and go from like uptown to downtown, like I wouldn't know how to do it. The way I do it is I get on my little iPhone and I plug it into Maps, and Maps tells me what train to go on. So like, yeah, to your point of like privilege, like yes, we are privileged in a world now that's so technologically advanced. And at that point, like your privilege was being able to understand how to get around New York if you live there, like speaking English at that point, like it is a privilege, there's all those layers of privilege. I completely agree with you. And it's, but again, it just kind of like brings back that point of like, how you said like, New York is New York. And, I can't imagine living in New York and someone coming up to me and being like, how do I get here? And, I'd probably be pissed off and be like, figure it out. But there's also that part of me that like, to me, like not living
not what I was expecting you to say, just for the record, but
but you know what I mean? Like in a world now, like, I mean, I'm of the personality where I'm like, okay, I'm going to help someone get there. But there's so many things that go into this, and it makes you question, like, again, coming back to that duty of like, not duty necessarily, but the relationship even of like a landlord. Like it's not someone who's like coming up to you randomly and trying to piss you off. Like this is someone who's paying you to live in a home.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's really fair. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I just bring it all back to like the fact that like the confusion levels are like, or the confusion layers are adding on top of each other, and it's just creating like a really unfortunate situation for Henryk. And so we talked about wrong place, wrong time. Spoiler alert: he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. So you want to talk about how that happened?
Yeah, I think we should get into it and, unfortunately learn what happened.
Right. Well, Ben-Stuy, Alex, is a really rough neighborhood, and specifically was back in 2001. There were constant shootings, gang activity, and drug sales on practically every corner. Police even described it as a dangerous part of town for them to be in, just to, like, exist. And even besides the insanity that was going on in Midtown that day, the precinct was already understaffed. As a detective for the NYPD later told the U.S. Sun, the precinct had about 35 detectives handling more than 5,000 criminal cases in the neighborhood a year. On average, about 20 murders and 75 non-fatal shootings every single year.
Right. So obviously this is just not the best place to be in anyway. But you know, in these kind of instances, it makes you wonder, like, why and like what promotes it. Like, in these neighborhoods, you kind of hear things where, there's relationships between the two people, the victim and the assailant, whether it's, like you said, there's like whether it's like a drug deal gone bad or like they're fighting over something or whatever it is, so it bears that question on one hand of, I guess, like there was no relationship between our victim and the person who killed him. So it bears that question of like, why? But then, you hear the police on the other hand saying, it's a dangerous part of the area for us to be in. There's that protective layer in these communities and, just anywhere in general, you're protective of your land, your property. So like, was there that intimidation factor? When, he kind of like went into this neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, and again, like someone like us, right, who like gets that much, I feel like, to stumble into that part of town, like would be easy enough for us to get out of it, right? To like, just turn around. But like if you're still just totally lost, like no idea what's going on, no idea where you are, no idea where you're supposed to be, and and just get off at the wrong subway stop, and you're just trying to like figure out, like think you're in the right place but clearly aren't, someone like Henryk, like that, it just adds to all sorts of like bad, layers and bad situations and just badness, right? And so, like, again, we talked about wrong place, wrong time. This seems to be it. And also, let's, add another layer to this as well. Henryk, like some people, like Eastern European man, like, he is he's a brown man, right? Like dark complexion, dark, hair, and walking into this neighborhood with army camouflage clothes on. And so it just, I won't elaborate any more than that because I think we all know where I'm going with this.
Right. It's stereotypes, and you have to kind of address that there are stereotypes going on, especially with what occurred earlier that morning.
Right.
I don't know if at that point, like I can't remember, but I'm sure people had started to figure out like who may have been responsible for what happened that morning. So
right.
There's those unfortunate stereotypes, and it's horrible to even like think that that's what could have prompted this. But then it's, you also wonder, like, if you were to put stereotypes aside, like what prompted someone to then walk up to Henryk potentially and go up to, like, what was he doing when walking through this neighborhood that like would have prompted this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and also I have to, put additional context here because it's like you think about like 2005-ish when like, Islamophobia was like running rampant and like, and that kind of, xenophobia, all that stuff was like very prominent. And that was spurred directly off of 9/11. Even before that, like there was still all sorts of, instability going on in the Middle East, and so there was still like a solid amount of that, even if it wasn't as prominent as like people would assume in the aftermath of 9/11. It was still very much so around because of the instability going on in that part of the country, and and still very much so people making assumptions based off of people's skin color, specifically related to that group of people.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, again, it's horrible to even think about like that's what prompts people to act a certain way, and it's just crazy to think about that that's what would be a reason. But again, like if that were to be put aside, like what else could have prompted anyone to like kind of react this way?
Right, absolutely. Well, we may be able to learn something here from the people who saw like what happens next happen, right? So let's get there, Alex. So it's, a witness actually recalls to police seeing Henryk from their window walking down the street with his bag in hand and a piece of paper in the other. And the man looked lost, according to them, frantically looking from the piece of paper in his hand up to the streets and the numbers on the homes, and he was clearly looking for an address and was clearly just out of place. But even the people who lived in the neighborhood knew it wasn't the safest place to be, so they didn't get out of their home to help the man because they didn't feel safe either. Plus, again, like we were talking about, New Yorkers, not exactly known to be, the people to go out of your way, to give directions to a stranger. And again, I say all that to say, like, Alex and I are very much so both New Yorkers, like stereotypes are a stereotype for a reason. But the neighbor, just let him go by. Plus, the witness could see that there were other people in the street who were looking at him just as strangely as the neighbor was.
The way in which that just came out, like even, I don't know, just a thought popped into my head where the portion of, this neighbor sees Henryk walking on the street, but says, like, I know this isn't the safest place to be, so I'm not going to go, like, see if he's okay.
Yeah.
Not for nothing. You live in that neighborhood. Do you never walk outside your house? Like, that's just the first thing that comes to mind. You're telling me, and I get it, it's dark out at this point. You don't know what you don't know who this man is. You don't know what his prerogative is. Sure. Fine. That's very fair to be like, let me stay inside, like, rather safe than sorry. But the reasoning to be is that this neighborhood isn't safe, but you live there. Right. You go outside at some point. So there's that. But then also the neighbor also sees other people outside. Were they able to identify anyone at that point? Like, could those have been one of the people that ended up interacting with Henryk. Like it's just all these questions start to come up about this
Yeah.
neighbor specifically.
Yeah. Well, and like there's a series of events here that kind of like blurs the line there for sure, Alex. So definitely hold that thought 100%. And also too, Alex, because there was, I read it somewhere at some point when like all the interactions with with witnesses and with neighbors who lived in the area, who also said that like, and I don't remember the exact times, but it was basically more or less like that the only safe place to like be outside of your home in this neighborhood, according to them, is between like the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 a.m. And like outside of that, like you really don't want to be like out and like, on your own or like, exposed. And so kind of like I feel like that adds like a little bit of context of like the way that people even who live in the neighborhood are viewing this neighborhood. And so to your point, like, sure, like, if someone is clearly looking out of place, then like maybe it's your responsibility to help them. But then also too, like if you're thinking to yourself, like, I don't know this person, like I don't know what I'm gonna get myself into. It's that constant, it's that, that classic example of like, people like hear that woman scream down the alley and like, do you do something about it? Like, what do you do about it? Like you assume that everyone else is gonna do something about it. And too, I think there's like this certain level of like, we talk about this a lot on Crime Over Wine, and like, we talk about it when it comes to like, these like really small towns, but like, Brooklyn is certainly not a stranger to crime. It's certainly not this neighborhood, but like point being is that there's always this assumption that like it's fine, right? Like everything's fine. Like it's and you want to know how I know it's fine, because every time that I've had this feeling before, it's been fine before. So like it must be fine this time. Like I must be overthinking it. And so that has to have been going through their mind as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, it's so much easier for me to sit here and be like, yeah, like, why wouldn't you just go outside? But like, I wasn't there. I don't know what other people's like thoughts are, what they go through. Like, they obviously knew that neighborhood better than I do sitting here 20 something years later.
Sure.
But
right.
It's just like one of those things that like looking back, like in my head, like raises those questions to me. And, I agree with you in that sense of like, you see something once, it's been fine every time, so I'm just going to like let it be. Like, of course, like that's just how it works. Yeah. And then, those like one-off circumstances, unfortunately, like lead to those like, should we change, at a different point?
Yeah. Well, and like, again, like we've us, our crime loving minds, right? Like sit there and go, of course you have to go help. Like, of course it's a bad situation. Like, of course. And like, but like not a whole lot of people think that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Well, a second witness also reported seeing Henryk that night. They saw Henryk walking down Albany Avenue toward a phone booth, and then saw him, turning around and walking back down Albany Avenue in the opposite direction, only this time they saw 3 guys following him by about 50 feet. And just as Henryk walked down the street and he and the 3 guys following him left the view of the witnesses, gunshots rang out, anywhere from 6 to 8 of them, according to police and witnesses.
So now you have someone else who sees not only Henryk, but other individuals outside. Like at that point, one, like, were you able to identify them before they went out of your view? Like, do you know who they are? Like,
right.
Can you describe anything about them? Because I think, like, after an incident occurs, like, you think about the questions, like, police are going to ask, right? Is there anything to identify the individuals that you saw? It doesn't have to be a perfect face, but something they were wearing, hair, like, color of their skin, whatever it may be. And then, now they're out of their view, but you hear something. So, like, did anyone go and see what was happening?
Well, again, witnesses were simply too afraid for their own safety, Alex, in this neighborhood at this time of night. And so, no one did. At first, there was a 911 call placed, though, actually, Alex. But, again, because of the madness going on in Manhattan, we have to keep remembering that the closest precinct only had 1 detective to spare. They didn't even have crime scene techs. And so the detective, get this, Alex, was dispatched to the scene with a Polaroid camera to take their own pictures and arrived in less than a minute. When they got to the scene, they found Henryk on the ground. The piece of paper with those directions were in hand, and his backpack was up on a step leading up to a door. And so because of the way that they found Henryk, investigators had determined that he likely was shot and walked up to the door, banging and screaming out for help before he fell to the ground and died in a pool of his own blood.
So it's so funny that you know, because I feel like just hearing all this stuff about the police officers, we talked about this on the last episode with Sneha, where it was like with her investigation, I also remember questioning, like, were the police so distracted with, not maybe distracted, it's not the right word, but so, you know, preoccupied with what was going on in Lower Manhattan that it took away resources from other crimes such as this. And like, that's not to say that it's wrong or it's right, because obviously like what happened on that day was horrible, but it just kind of, again, like raises that question of like, you know, how do you prioritize resources to make sure that your city is still safe in other aspects and other parts where maybe they aren't immediately affected? You know, like this area, for instance, wasn't in that immediate like plume, you know, it wasn't ground zero and it wasn't in that plume. So it's like, okay, you know, obviously you need the resources and there was people going in from everywhere and anywhere, but you know, how do you allocate to make sure that your neighborhoods that weren't directly affected kind of like are still safe? So that's like kind of one of the things that like was some like a curiosity point, I guess, in my head once more.
Yeah, well, and two, like like I remember when we were talking about Sneha's case, right? Like we were talking about the, like, you know, the madness of people, of all the people like trying to find their missing loved ones, like all the people who like were on the news like holding up pictures of their loved ones, like trying to find them. And then if you remember, like there was Sneha's brother who, like, you know, was going up and like trying to get attention, but you know, for Sneha, but like wasn't, but no one was interested because he, you know, as soon as he started saying, oh no, she went missing, I think before this, I don't think she was a part of this, you know, and that's when they were like turned off from it. And so it's kind of like the same situation here, where it's like, it's you have like there's all this attention in Midtown, and like, you know, where's the attention, you know, on the rest of their crimes, right? And like, again, like nobody can blame them necessarily, but like that's the, you know, the circumstances that we're in.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, you know, that's like one thing that I thought about. And then the other thing is like, you know, you think about this crime scene, you're wondering like, okay, like what happened? You know, clearly witnesses are saying he's walking around confused, doesn't really seem to know where he's walking. So you're wondering like what type of interaction you're now dealing with. Like, was this something like a robbery, or, you know, was, you know, he trying to ask for directions or like something to that nature?
Right. Well, police actually, Alex, to that point, you know, actually did find Henryk's wallet on his person with cash inside of it. But what police are assuming actually happened at this point is kind of unclear. I have to imagine, though, that, you know, some level of them is assuming that this may have been some sort of robbery or some sort of interaction, even if it was gang activity related. But police end up finding multiple casings at the scene of Henryk's murder, indicating that he was shot at multiple times. But a medical examiner later determines that he died by a single gunshot wound to the chest with lung and musculoskeletal injuries.
You know, you wonder like what the interaction was, and clearly like nothing on him was missing. So the person who did this, at, you know, based on what you're saying, didn't really want anything from Henryk. So I also find, you know, the multiple casings, so clearly he was shot more than once, and that's so interesting that he only died from a single gunshot wound. So then, you know, my head starts running like, what shot was that? What position were they in? How far were they to each other? Like, could he have, I guess, survived this incident?
Yeah. Well, and that was kind of where my mind went when I saw the multiple gun casings, or shell casings, Alex. And what that says to me, I feel like, is that it had to have been so far away, right? Because if it was like point blank, then there wouldn't have been all the, you know, like assuming that it was a targeted attack. Then there wouldn't have been all those shell casings. And so to me, that says that they were like far enough away, you know, maybe about 50 feet. That seems right to me. That's what the, you know, the witness, you know, reported, you know, or estimated to police later. And so, so that's kind of where my mind goes. And but it's either that or it was some kind of like, you know, like messing around, like maybe even some sort of accident, or like, you know, these guys were like, you know, like I think about like a lot of times in gangs, they will, like, not that I know a whole lot about being in gangs, but like I know I've heard stories, just to be clear, but like you know, I feel like they will like from what I've heard, like they'll, you know, like stand a certain distance away from each other and like shoot at each other, and like whoever hits the other first wins. And so that's, you know, maybe it was that kind of thing, and then it was like, you know, and then, you know, something went wrong, and like, and, you know, and then Henryk got, you know, into the line of fire or something like that. But then I think back to the fact that he was being followed, and that just seems a little bit more targeted to me. So
Right.
I
Like
don't know.
I completely agree with you. It definitely sounds more targeted than just like being like caught in like the line of crossfire. You again, you had those witnesses that say, I saw those three individuals like follow him and then they went out of my like line of sight. So how far were those individuals from him? And again, like you can shoot at someone and not have perfect aim, like if you're not trained, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I've only shot a gun once when I was in Texas, and it was at a shooting range, and those things it's scary. Let me tell you. But like even then, like I remember like they had to like hold me because like the ricochet, I don't know, it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Like it could go so many different ways. But I agree, it does kind of like raise those questions of like how far people were standing, like. And again, just like, what was that interaction? Because to me, the way this is going is it doesn't seem like it's just kind of like a accident or like there was no interaction here. Like something tells me that there was some sort of like interaction between Henryk and the other people.
Yeah, right. They had to have like exchanged words to a certain extent, right? Like I feel like nobody just like pulls a gun on a random person. Maybe, I don't know. Again, never done that before, so I don't really know what that would entail. But like. So maybe, I don't know. But police did end up canvassing the neighborhood for 3 days, talking to neighbors, but seeming to not really be expecting to get much out of them, given the reputation of the neighborhood. And like, again, this is a neighborhood that like probably, does like has seen an officer or two, probably had a few bad experiences, and like the trust just isn't there. But what they do get is people who did see Henryk that night and who swirl around some pretty intense rumors about what may have happened. Get ready for that big test with Study.com. Study.com offers learning materials and test prep, even LSAT study prep guides for all of my legal nerds listening. Unfortunately, there aren't any wine study guides, and believe me, I did check. Listeners can get 30% off their first 3 months of any subscription level using the promo code CrimeOverWine. Again, that's promo code CrimeOverWine, no spaces, for 30% off your first 3 months at Study.com. Learn faster, stay motivated, study smarter with our sponsor, Study.com.
Hello, Crime Over Wine listeners. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather.
We are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder.
We bring you the good, the badass, and the crime.
Each week, we bring you stories from missing and murdered
to survivors and women who empower you.
And of course, some mom talk sprinkled in.
Check us out wherever you get your podcasts at Like Mother, Like Murder.
And give us a follow on social media so that we can say hi.
Okay, love you, bye.
Okay, love you, bye.
All right, Alex, we've given the wine just enough time to kind of breathe a little bit. How are you feeling about this one?
I have to say, I feel like after the first sip, I definitely don't get that like metallic-y lead taste anymore. So I think maybe it was just part of like the purify process, but I like it. I would say I would definitely purchase it again. I would recommend to someone who maybe wants to try a red. I think, again, it's not like too aggressive like some people like to think, reds are. I would definitely recommend this if someone's willing to like be open to trying a red wine.
Yeah. It's definitely a little bit, it's a little bit different than what I typically, like have, experience with Cabernets in the past, for sure. But it's kind of interesting to me because the label on the wine, is like, looks like element, like table of elements.
Yeah.
Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not very good with this kind of stuff, but like that's how it like it's designed out to be. Again, we post all of our wines that we drink every week on our social media pages, so go check that out. But it then when I thought about that, and then you were talking about lead, and I was like, oh, actually, like, yeah, it feels kind of like elemental, sciencey kind of flavors almost. Like it's like I don't know exactly how to like put my finger on that, but you know what I mean? Like I feel like those are the kind of flavors / vibes I'm getting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think the the company that like, or the vineyard that this comes from, like all of the different wines like have a different like interesting name. Like this one's called like Substance. So like I wonder if like each wine maybe has like a different type of like particular taste to it. I'll have to check them out.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like we have to, have Alex back on and drink all the different wines from this vineyard.
I mean, twist my arm. Wine and crime.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
my two favorite
right.
things.
right. And me, of course.
Of course,
obviously,
yeah,
so.
duh. I figured I didn't have to
course.
say that. Like, that's known.
Right. Yeah. It's a given. Well, okay, let's get back to this case, Alex, because we have a lot to kind of get through in this back end. A little bit that we've talked about, a little bit that we haven't. So you want to get there?
Yeah, let's talk about it.
All right, excellent. Well, police start hearing that based on how Henryk had been dressing that day and the color of his hair and his darker complexion, that they thought the, quote, Polish guy with fatigues on may have been a terrorist and that he looked, quote, menacing.
Again, this is kind of like, we talked about this a little earlier, but like that whole presumption that he could have been involved or like a terrorist, like that is just such a horrible thing to think about, that's the way people's minds work. Like you have nothing to go off of based on other than two things: that something horrible happened that morning, and we're all at this point understanding that it was likely, a terrorist attack, and that presumably, and I mean, obviously it is true, but like, you've never seen someone around this neighborhood before, but like what do they describe as menacing? Because what we know at this point is, people are describing him like walking around confused, holding a paint. I'm thinking of like, if I'm lost, like I'm looking all over the place to try to figure out where I am. So like, what are they seeing that like maybe people listening to this aren't understanding?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's like, an interesting example, right, of like how like, two different people can see two totally different things in the same set of actions or the same set of circumstances. And so it's like, like depending on your background, all that stuff. And it's like, maybe it was just like the fact that he was like looking around, trying to figure out like what was happening, like what was going on around here. Like, like when nobody else was really doing that, like maybe that was like, it seemed like plotting more so, you know what I mean? Like, again, like obviously it's not what was happening. And so let's be clear about that. But like that's kind of like, that's the only thing that like would make sense to me. And then on top of that, right, like the fact that like by this point, like it was later on in the night, like again, like they probably like the what had, the rumors or the idea of what had happened that morning in Midtown was kind of floating. And so like maybe it was just by this point they were just like, oh, maybe that's the guy. You know what I mean? Like I could see that like that leap happening. Again, not to say that it's reasonable, because it's not, but I don't know. That's kind of where my mind goes.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm left with all these other questions, right? Like you think about what people described that day to be like in general, and I know like this is me like knowing about what people say. You hear in all the stories and documentaries that they talk about, but a lot of people said like your windows were open that day because it was such like a beautiful day out. So then my next thought is like, was anyone in this neighborhood with their window open, like in a certain proximity to this event unfolding, to be able to maybe even hear an interaction? Like there's no one. And again, like to your point before, that like maybe people weren't willing to speak up because they don't have great interactions with police officers in this neighborhood in general, but like that no one heard. And like, it's just like, it's almost like you hear silence and then gunshots, like why? And again, it leaves you with all these questions. And then like his poor family, like what are they thinking?
Well, yeah, and like again to that point too, right? Like with all the confusion going on in the world, and then to have to deal with this, right? Like to get this kind of news that like nobody wants to get, right? But this theory was what Henryk's sister at least started to believe in her heart of hearts, Alex. That because of everything going on in the world at that time, that the group of men who were seen following Henryk that night may have assumed the worst of him, tried to confront him, heard that maybe he clearly didn't speak English very well, and maybe misunderstood or assumed something about him and shot him. And so after she heard of Henryk's death, she went so far as to write the Polish consulate, but didn't get much from that beyond a 20-minute meeting and not much more. As she pressed investigators about her brother's murder, an investigator allegedly at one point responded saying, quote, "It was probably a black criminal that shot him, and that's it."
That's just like so sad to like be left, and like again with all these like unsolved crimes, like for families to be left with like, that's it, like this is just kind of, it is what it is, and that's what happened. But you know, there's a part of me that's honestly, maybe this is the unpopular opinion here, but I just don't see this being an interaction based on what had occurred that morning. And that's just like my strong opinion here.
No, not at all.
You know, that's just, I'm just like, think of like any kind of circumstance. And I just like don't know that would prompt someone to, and again, I don't know what it's like to think like that. Again, I've never shot a gun. To me, like, it's like I could never hurt a fly, nonetheless, like, shoot a gun at someone. So, like, I don't know what people who murder people think. Like, that's just another fascinating thing to me. But it's just one of those things, like, I just couldn't fathom that is the reason why. Like, you know, you hear about all these things, and especially in, like, unsafe neighborhoods, that it's usually something, like, predatorial, not predatorial, but like, you know, you're being protective of your area. But I just like don't see it not being some sort of interaction between them. And I just don't see that the interaction was like, you realized he doesn't speak English and you thought that he was involved in what had happened that day. I think it was you realized maybe he didn't speak English and you realized like this is going to be an easy attack.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think you're probably onto something there for sure. I think that probably does make a good amount of sense. But then going back to what we were talking about before about like, you know, again, so they're your first reaction from this, or, you know, maybe not your first reaction, but at some point your reaction, you know, to the family is that they were probably just some black criminal. Cause like that is odd to me. Like, sure, this is probably, it's this part of Brooklyn probably is a predominantly black neighborhood, but like the fact that you automatically assume that they were a black criminal is odd. Like that they were, you know, some, you know, historically, you know, like significant criminals is interesting. But then to like dismiss it as that is kind of interesting because it's like regardless of whether he was black, whether he was white, like regardless of what the circumstances is, like that's not just it, like that seems like, you know, if that's the path you're gonna go down, like at least go down that path, like don't just like brush it off.
Right, exactly. And especially knowing what you know, again, you have those witnesses who are saying like, we saw 3 people. So like, even to give her that much of like, you know, there are witnesses, however, like no one can identify them, or like we have witnesses, no one can identify them, but this is what we do know. Again, like it gives her that kind of like closure where it's like someone did see him, you know, he was followed by someone, like whether or not people are willing to come forward, like she could have done her own like not, you know, like it could have prompted something more than just being like, oh, it was like another black criminal. Like what, like to your point, even like, how do you, like, what does that even mean? Like, is this, how do you know that this person has committed crimes in the past? Like that's what defines them as a criminal? Or is it just because like the area? I don't know. I think that's circumstances.
Or or the area, right? And to that point too, it's like back that up. Like you have witnesses who saw, you know, at least the person the people who are presumed to have done this, like maybe like say like, yeah, like they saw that they were black men and they likely were responsible. You know what I mean? It's like there's so many other things to say than just like, oh, like they were probably just this guy, you know, this black guy who shot him. Like that's it. Like, okay, like maybe let's go down that path a little bit here. Like maybe let's go down that road, you know? And it's like so anyways, like again, it just, and like I don't know, I guess I like go down to the extent of like by this point too, like, you know, like even months, years later, like the you know, aftermath of 9/11 was still very prominent, specifically among the first responder community. So like maybe it just was like a comment that was just like out of pure exhaustion. Like I read even something that it was like 6 months after the attacks, that first responders, police officers, never got a day off. They like, you know, worked 12-hour days, like all this stuff. And so it's like, I'm sure that sets in at some point, but it's still like, let's investigate this murder, right? Like let's it's not an easy thing to hear from a from a family member's perspective. So like maybe let's use a little bit more caution around that.
100%. Like also at the end of the day, like of course, like you're working day in and day out, but like you do have a job to do, and like that there's other things, there's other things going on, like nothing stopped. So, you have to be cognizant of everything else going on around you.
Yeah, right. Crime never takes a day off.
No, it does not.
Takes a day off. All right. No, it does not. Well, Henryk's sister, get this too, Alex, even at one point floats the idea that an NYPD police officer may have actually been the one to approach Henryk, asked him for some kind of identification, but when he didn't have any, they got physical, and Henryk ended up getting shot in this whole interaction. But police shoot that down very quickly when a reporter asked the department about that possibility. And like, I'm not really totally sure where Henryk's sister gets this from. It seems like it was just kind of like a theory that she was floating publicly, but like, again, the police department's like, no way.
Yeah, I think that's just like a bizarre theory, because at the end of the day, like, that's in that theory, she's not saying like he was just like randomly approached and they shot him, because then, not to say that they would cover something like that, but you would be putting up a defense a little bit. She goes as far to elaborate to say like they got physical. Like, wouldn't, if something happened between them, like one, they would have to fess up to it. Like they can't just like cover that up.
Sure. Well,
but
I don't know about that, but sure. Yeah.
I like to have faith.
I like to think so. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. That they would report something like that. But, to say that things got physical, like at that rate, you have the self-defense qualified immunity that NYPD and other law enforcement agents have, where if it did get physical, you could say, you know what, like this is what happened, but it's not excessive force, and we're protected under qualified immunity because he got physical with us. But, they denied it even in that aspect, because, of course there's all these things going on. If her original story is, well, they may have presumed that, given his physical features that he was involved in something, then you get that whole, everything else that goes into that. So I don't know, but I just think that's so like such a far-fetched theory that I think it's very difficult to believe.
Yeah, it's a left field like kind of theory for sure. And like, again, she doesn't have anything to back this up necessarily. It's just kind of like this may have happened. And like from what I've read about Henryk, like he doesn't like, this doesn't really seem to be like him. It's like he seems to be one that, like, he's like a dad, right? Like he seems to be like, he's like a hard worker. He seems to be the kind of guy that like would recognize a police officer when he approaches and like, cooperated as a result. And so like that doesn't really seem to be the kind of like situation that Henryk would find himself in. So it's far-fetched. And I only read that in like one or two articles, just to be clear.
Right. Like even to, 100%. I mean, to even near that point, like he doesn't speak English, but you would think he would recognize a police officer if he saw one. That would just be like, exactly. There's no propensity for violence from him. Like, that's just a bizarre thing, but...
Right. Well, today, investigators say that they are still actively investigating Henryk's death and that it's not a cold case. But when reporters have asked the department to elaborate on that, they didn't, saying they aren't able to since it's still an active investigation. Investigators have said that they have recently called people who lived in the block to ask them for more information, but again, didn't elaborate on whether that produced anything fruitful. But investigators have said that they believe Henryk's death was the result of a random robbery, not a hate crime even to this day. Henryk's sister pushes back on that idea, saying that Henryk only had $5 in his wallet when he died, but investigators have clarified, saying that he actually did also have $75 in cash in his back pocket.
I think that's, again, so interesting that the sister would push back on that kind of theory. Do you think, I don't know, just to me, I'm like, do you think a robber really sits there and goes, oh, they only have $5 in their wallet? Like, they don't know what they have. When you're committing a robbery, you're not, you don't necessarily know what that, like in broad daylight, if they're walking by, you don't know what they have on them. How much cash
do you have? Do you mind if I take it? Yeah.
It just doesn't work like that, at least based on what I know. But
to that point, if you don't mind me pushing back here, Alex, like if like investigators are so determined that it was a random robbery, then why did they leave cash back? You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like, and then also too, if you like are gonna rob somebody, like why would you like to her point, like why would you just leave the $5, even if it was just the $5 in his wallet? You know what I mean? Like you take the whole wallet, you would think, anyways. No.
Right. No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like this, I don't think this was a robbery to begin with. So like this fact that the sister's pushing back and then even like the police department's pushing back, like it just doesn't make sense, I think.
Yeah.
Or like,
right. Yeah. But then from like an investigator standpoint, it's hard for me to like see their point there of like, okay, again, like, no, it must have been a robbery because he had $75 in his pocket. It's like, well, that seems to be the evidence that it wasn't a robbery indeed, right? Like, in my opinion, because again, like, you're going to take that $75, like, you know, to make it worth every single penny, you know what I mean? If you're going to commit a murder. So, I don't know. I don't really know what to make of that. I feel like some sort of robbery or some sort of like misunderstanding, some sort of like, you know, random kerfuffle seems to make the most amount of sense. But like, why is kind of where I land of like, why did this whole thing happen? Like absent again, I like to think that, you know, the hate crime aspect of it, the stereotyping aspect of it doesn't exist, but it of course does.
Right.
But so absent that, I don't like, that seems to make the most amount of sense to me. If that's the motivation, if that's the explanation here, a robbery doesn't.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, like everyone can ponder different theories and ideas, and I think a lot of them like may make sense to certain people and not to others. But I agree that like if you're robbing someone, like I completely agree. Like why not just like take everything? Because that's exactly what you would do. Like you wouldn't just leave everything. So I agree with you.
Yeah, and it's odd to me, I guess, that like again, so we're 22 plus years like removed from this crime. It doesn't really seem to me that we like know much more about Henryk's death than like literally the day that it happened. And so I don't really I don't get the like from a department level of saying that it's still active. Like we're not going to say anything because we're still looking into it. Like what are you looking into? Like again, like unless I'm totally missing something, it just doesn't really seem like there's much more to look into than there was 20 years ago.
Right, and like I think we're still, from our perspective, it's like, what did those neighbors say? Like, were they able to give a description of the people? Like, and from there, like, how do you take, because again, like if you go up to those two neighbors who eventually like saw Henryk and they're saying like, you know, this is what I saw, but like, there's no way for me to identify them, like, then they would close the case. So like, what are, like, there's something that's leaving this open, at least like that's my thought.
Yeah. Sure.
But they just like, it's like a dead end at this point, maybe. I don't know.
Right. It does. Yeah, it feels like that. And then it makes me wonder too, like something, because a lot of times when I feel stuck here and we're talking about like possible organized crime in some way, shape or form, like my thought immediately goes to some sort of CI, some sort of, you know, like bigger fish here, and so maybe that's kind of where they're going, that they just like really seem to think that like whoever they have pinned down here, like even as a suspect or a person of interest in this, like can lead them to something much bigger, and so maybe that's just where they're where they're at. It was just like, we can't talk about this because it just relates to something, or maybe it just ties back into something much bigger that we're all just missing in some way, shape or form, that like none of us know about, right? Like I mean, like let's go down the real conspiracy theory hole here, right?
Right. No, exactly. Like if there's something bigger in terms of like, maybe this is where my head goes, like if that's a area that's known to be like of high crime population anyway, like is this like, you know, an organized crime like gang type of thing? Like are they trying to all like link the pieces that way? Like I don't know.
Sure.
But I do think it's interesting that like they have so little, yet they're like keeping it open for a reason.
Yeah. Right. Well, and again, it's like 20 years later, like at some point you kind of have to assume that whatever you were hoping to get out of that isn't going to come, or maybe it is just that intense and elaborate that like that it could possibly come. So who knows? Or maybe we're just overthinking it and they just don't want to talk about it. Like it could just be that, right? Like who knows, right? Like again, like you, like when you get this level of information, like you just have to, like all the paths are open as far as I'm concerned. But the lead investigator on the case retired in 2011, and investigators assigned to the case today have said as recently as last year that they remain confident that the case would be solved one day, actually, saying they are still, even to this day, seeking new leads. And in 2022, as recently as that, they revisited the case using new technology that wasn't available to them in 2001. So that gives me a little bit of hope potentially that they, that they think, that it's worth it, right? Because that stuff costs money. But Eva doesn't think that the day of justice will ever come for them. She has since quit her low-paying job to become a biology teacher in Poland in order to provide for her children, while the rest of the world marks the anniversary of September 11th, 2001 with memorial services, these large elaborate ones, and family members of victims hold their own memorials in concert with other victims' families. Henryk's family mourns on their own that day with a church service at churches across the world, but specifically his sister still goes to St. Patrick's Cathedral. There have been no arrests made in Henryk's death, and investigators have never named a person of interest publicly. But again, police say they are still following up on leads more than 22 years later and feel confident that they are going to be able to make an arrest one day. So if you know anything about Henryk's death, call NYPD Crime Stoppers at 1-800-577-TIPS or 1-800-577-8477. And we're going to put that number on our website in our show notes as always. But Alex, that is all that we have for you this week. Kind of a, odd, like information thin, but very complex case that we're talking about. So thanks so much for coming on. It's always a pleasure seeing you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love coming on. I love seeing you, obviously, but I love coming on, talking about these things, and obviously sitting and having a glass of wine.
Yeah, well, those are my two favorite things, three favorite things, including you. But also, so I am, again, so going back to like the technology part of this whole thing, like again, like they don't like throw that around lightly. I guess I'm wondering what your thought is there. Like I feel like they. Like that to me, like going back to our previous conversation about like how much do they actually have, that to me seems to be pretty big evidence that they have something potentially that they are holding closer to their chest.
Yeah, and it's like one of those things where I guess like we're not going to know unless like something new unfolds. Right. Like, at this point in time, I think like technology, and we are so advanced that like, again, people are finding things from years and years and years ago and able to like solve certain things decades. And put things together. So like, what could they, like, I'm thinking like, what's there? They have the shell casings, they have his backpack. They like, if those things even like exist, I'm going to assume because it's active, they have to have these things. So it's like, what is on them? Like, you always think about like with guns and ammunition, like DNA evidence, like there's clearly no gun, but like with the shell castings, like can you link it to a certain gun, and then knowing what guns may exist in that neighborhood, like, you kind of just get like wrapped up, and I could go in a huge rabbit hole with all of the theories based on like that. But like, yeah, I wonder if like maybe that's just a thing that they're like sitting on and waiting to see if like something comes up.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting too. Is just like might as well kind of thing. Like that's kind of how I'm feeling about it, is that it's like, okay, well, we have this, but again, that stuff costs money. It costs time. Like it's not cheap. Like it's like it feels significant. It feels like there's like, and like what kind of technology we're talking about. Like I don't know. I wish I knew more about what exactly they were trying to do here. I agree. That maybe might point us in a little bit of a direction. There's like, it's like around the tip of my tongue, it feels like, of like, it's like that, like we need one little piece of information to be like, oh, that's what they're doing.
Right. Well, maybe if they ever release that information one day, we're going to have to come back and talk about it.
Oh, I will have you on anytime, any day of the week. But Alex, thank you so much for coming on again. Tell everyone where they can find you and your work online if you would like.
Sure. So I am on Instagram. Feel free to like follow, connect. I love to talk about literally anything and everything. I don't shut up, especially when it comes to like legal stuff. As Liam like mentioned earlier, I did just graduate from law school, just took the bar. My Instagram is Alex Raye, RAYEE_. So feel free to connect on social media.
Excellent. Well, thank you again so much for coming on, Alex, and thank you all so much for listening. We are going to put all of our sources on our website so you can read everything for yourself and probably come up with a few theories too. And if you are just loving this podcast and are just looking for a way to tell everyone and anyone about it, the best way to help people discover this podcast is by leaving us a 5-star rating and a review wherever you are listening right now. So make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're wondering what we have in store for you next week, here's a quick sneak peek. Hello everybody, it's Liam, and next week I am going to tell you a story about love and loss. Is a man's creepy and a bit put-offish reputation in a small Georgia town signs of a man capable of darkness, or is there something more there that could explain it all? You'll hear that story with some help from someone who can tell it just about better than anyone else. We'll have that story for you next Wine Wednesday on the next episode of Crime Over Wine.
Proud member of the Podnuga Network.